Hi, and welcome to the show. Rate and review at kevinmd.com/rate. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today in the show with Christine Zharova. She's an attorney, and her Kevin MD article is titled Medical Malpractice is a Lot Like Running a Marathon. Christine, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dr. Poe, for having me and letting me share my story with your audience today.
So we'll get into the article in a little bit, but first off, briefly share your story and journey to where you are today.
Sure. My name is Christine Zharova. I am a former medical malpractice defense attorney. In the first 14 and a half years of my career, I spent defending physicians, their groups, and hospitals in medical malpractice cases. Currently, I'm a business litigation attorney. I still get to help physicians in their, with business related questions and non-compete issues. And then this year, I became a consultant and a coach to physicians to help them navigate the medical malpractice process, the emotional and the practical aspects of it.
All right. And as you know, when you talk to a lot of physicians, that whole medical malpractice process is a little bit of a black box. So what would you say are some of the biggest misconceptions about that process that you like to clear up with physicians?
I think the process feels as heavy for physicians because of the lack of education. I know that when physicians are going to medical school, there's not a lot of time that is spent on educating physicians on the process. There's a lot of shame associated with it because there's lack of conversations between colleagues about what it feels like going through the process. What compounds the problem is the attorneys, which will rightfully so tell the physicians that are going through medical malpractice process not to discuss the ins and out of the lawsuit with anyone else besides their attorney.
And when you talk about the emotional impact on physicians, there's a little bit of tension there. They're not allowed to talk about the case with anybody else, yet sometimes they do need some emotional support, especially when it's going through it for the first time. There's a lot of unknowns there. How can physicians navigate that tension?
Yeah, absolutely. So when a medical malpractice attorney, when your attorney is telling you not to discuss the lawsuit with anyone else, what they mean is not to discuss the ins and outs of the lawsuit, the medicine, the strategy, your attorney's analysis of the exposure, things that have to do with facts and specific to your case. That is very different from how the lawsuit is affecting you on a personal human level, right? So what I've seen from my physicians is that the stress of the lawsuit spills over into their lives. It affects their relationship with their colleagues, their staff, their family, their friends, and most importantly, with themselves. They view themselves differently. They question who they are. They question how good they are of a physician. And so the reason why I went or I've gotten into this coaching and consulting part of my life, and I wrote this article is because I want physicians to understand that there are resources available, that the resources are not very well known, that physicians are so resistant to that, but it takes a village to help you get through the litigation process, which is very lengthy. From statistics, I know that physicians on average spend 10 to 25% of their professional life going through litigation and dedicating themselves. So if they're going to spend such a large chunk of their life doing that, wouldn't you want to get resources to help you through it? And we live in a day and age where there are resources available, right? You can Google your way through most things except for lawsuits. When you start Googling, I've had a lot of client physicians who told me when I got sued, the first thing I did is I Googled, how do I get through a lawsuit? The problem is when you Google that content, most of the content that pops up is written from the perspective of the patient or the patient's lawyer, which is going to make you feel like crap as a physician if you're reading it. It's only going to scare you more. It's not going to give you any clarity. It's not going to make you feel better. So that's one of the reasons why I started writing some articles and posts on LinkedIn to sort of educate physicians about the process, answer some common questions they have, and I'm doing what I'm doing today, writing this article for you as well.
All right, so let's go straight into your article. It's titled Medical Malpractice is a Lot Like Running a Marathon. Tell me, how did this article come together?
So the article came together as I was writing the posts and the content on LinkedIn. And one of my posts, I forgot what it was about, but in one of my posts, I was sort of, telling physicians to brace themselves because the process is going to be lengthy. We know the process can last 3 to 4 years. From what I've seen in my experience, it is now lasting a lot longer because of COVID. Trials are backed up. So the process is taking much more time. And then it hit me. I was like, it's just like running a marathon. It's a lengthy process that requires training, resources, support. And as I started to unpack that analogy some more, there were so many pieces of running a marathon and preparing a marathon that became so analogous, that made it so much more clear why physicians struggle as much as they do when they're going through the process. So when we think of a marathon runner, right, they have tools, they have resources like you can go on Google and you could find training plans, how to increase your speed, how to increase your miles, what to do if you're injured. You could find blogs of other marathoners that are going through the same thing. You're joining marathon clubs, you can have a coach. And that's just to run a marathon, which is a great challenge, but it's a voluntary endeavor versus lawsuits, which is such an inextricable part, an occupational hazard of the job. And we don't have many resources to help physicians with that. They have an attorney, of course. Some have a great risk management department, but attorneys, being a former medical malpractice attorney myself, your time is limited. You're not trained on helping physicians navigate through the process. Some attorneys aren't comfortable getting into the warm and fuzzies. I've never been like that, but I know some are. And then, as I'm writing this article, I was talking to a few of my medical malpractice defense colleagues, and I was polling them to figure out how much time we all spend with our doctors before we prepare them for their deposition, which happens about a year into the process, right? And most of my colleagues and me, we said 3 to 5 hours max. Now, of the 3 to 5 hours, more than 50% of that time is spent on reading through the medical records, talking to the physician about their independent recollection about the patient or what happened, talking about strategies, defenses. It is not spent on education, and it's also not spent on navigating the effect that the lawsuit is having on the physician as a whole.
So let's walk through a hypothetical case.
Sure.
If a physician is involved in a malpractice lawsuit, he just got notified of it. So walk me through some of the things that physician can do to make the process just a little bit more easier.
Sure. So of course, there are the practical aspects of being sued. If you just received your complaint, I know in some state it goes directly to a complaint. In other states like Florida, we have a pre-suit process. So once you're notified of a lawsuit, you want to make sure that your insurance carrier is on notice. And your insurance carrier will be in charge of setting you up with the attorney who's going to be assigned to your case. And the attorney will be in touch and kind of tell you the plan and what to expect and what to do. There are practical things for things that you shouldn't be doing, and I'll just throw a few of those out there. Obviously, don't change your medical records, don't modify it, don't supplement it, and make sure that when you meet with your attorney, you recognize and you realize that you have to take the front seat to your lawsuit. You have to be an active participant in that lawsuit. As you're starting to get through the process, consider what resources you need, right? You know yourself, you know what you need. Don't be afraid to realize that this is an area where you may need help, where you may need some additional guidance, some additional support. Not to generalize, but physicians don't like to be vulnerable. They're used to being in control. They don't like to ask for help, but this is a very different process from what you've ever experienced. It's a very different challenge that will undoubtedly feel extremely personal to you because it feels like an attack on you, your skills, and your intentions, right? You try to heal a patient, and let's say there's a negative outcome or there's a complication that arose, and then the patient sues you, it feels very personal. So recognize that every physician experiences this. There will be an emotional floodgate that will open up, and you will experience quite the cocktail of human emotions that you've never felt before. And it could be reaching out to a friend, a colleague, a counselor, or a coach, but there are resources available, and you do need a village to get through the litigation process. That's such a long journey.
So what are some of those resources that aren't immediately apparent? You mentioned earlier, sometimes the insurance provided attorney may not help the physician through those emotional aspects. So tell us some of those resources that physicians may not be aware of.
Yeah, and I think, I know this is kind of a developing coaching niche, but I think that there is a need for it to have physician either hire a coach, whether it's for a few sessions or whether it's, ongoing as they need during the process, because the process ebbs and flows, and so do the emotions with it. But you hire a coach to help you get through the emotional aspects of it, process things that are coming up. From my perspective, having the litigation experience and having the medical malpractice defense experience behind me, I know when certain emotions pop up at different stages. There are also things that I can help from a practical perspective, not relating to your lawsuit, but let's say relating to your practice, right? Let's say the lawsuit made you realize, I can implement a better process here, or I can tweak this and that. That's something you can work with a coach or a consultant on that. And I think it's just helpful, whether it's a coach, a consultant, another supporter, it's helpful to be able to have a sounding board that feels like it's 100% meant for you. It's a safe place where you can talk about what you're going through, talk about your feelings, talk about the thoughts that are coming up, and have someone allow you to process it in a safe place and then redirect you so that you can be focused and objective in your process. I called my coaching and consulting practice the med-mal game, because, not to minimize the significance of it or the importance of it, but as, personal as it feels, ultimately it is a game. There are rules, there are players, each player has a different objective. There are tools that you can implement. If you use the resources, there are tools that you can implement to allow yourself to get through the process with the least amount of impact, and to get to the point of objectivity, which I know every physician has, or they wouldn't be a physician, right? My intention is always, let's get the physician to realize that you are the best expert in that room. And it's you, because you have the experience, you have the knowledge, and you're the only one out of any player in that game who has seen the patient, who has physically evaluated the patient, who's gotten the patient's history, who has all that information. And so my sort of thought process about coaching from my perspective has been, let's get you to the point where you feel so empowered, in control, and where you're like, you know what? It's a lawsuit. It's going to be stressful, but I got this. Because physicians are not, challenges are not new to you guys. It's just a challenge that no one really talks about. No one really thinks about until it gets there, until it hits them.
Now, short of hiring a coach, any simple tips that physicians can do to help manage some of these unexpected stresses and emotions that accompany a lawsuit?
Yeah, I think it's understanding that your lawyer's instruction not to talk about it does not include and encompass talking about the experience of it. So maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's your friend. Once again, don't talk about the details of the lawsuit, but how you're feeling through it. It's okay to discuss it. I know there are
So what would
certain
be an example of that? Like you could give a hypothetical case study. Let's tell us a scenario of a case of a physician who may be involved in a lawsuit, and you just walk through what can and can't that physician talk about.
So, for example, let's say you're talking about your medical records, right? Obviously, that's protected by HIPAA. We don't want to be disclosing any confidential HIPAA protected information. Anything your lawyer told you, that's protected by the attorney-client privilege. You don't want to waive that. Anything like, your thoughts about the case, like, I'm wondering whether I should have ordered this drug or I should have ordered that drug. Don't talk about that. You could say, sometimes I look back and I wonder, could I have made a different decision, right? Because that's something that's fine to talk about, which is a very general thought that goes through every human's heads when we're facing a challenge where something negative happened, right? Could I have done something differently? But when you're putting it into context of the details of the lawsuit, that is going to be something your attorney is not going to want you to talk about. Your attorney's analysis of exposure or damages that could be awarded, your attorney's analysis of chance of prevailing at trial, you don't want to talk about it. But if you're like, man, I'm just sitting here, and this is what physicians usually tell me. It's so overwhelming. Like, I cannot put it out of my mind. Like, every day I go see my patient and it occupies my mind. Or I go see my patient, and if a patient reminds me in some way of the patient that sued me, or if the details of that patient's, condition or plan of care is similar, the details of my lawsuit, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stressed, I'm anxious. Those are the kinds of things that you should absolutely be talking to someone about, whoever it is.
What about shared experiences, right? Sometimes that's very helpful. And maybe
Yeah.
talking to another physician colleague who also had
Yes.
undergone a medical malpractice lawsuit, and maybe talking about some of those commonalities and shared experiences. Is that
Yes.
something like that okay?
Absolutely. I think if you reach out to physicians, whether I know certain medical malpractice insurance carrier have programs that are called like doctor to doctor, where they will connect you with another physician, different specialty who has been through the process. And I think it's very healing to go through the process and have a connection with someone that's been through it. I know there are physicians that have gone on other podcasts that have talked about their experience. Reach out to them. They're going to be more than happy to talk to you about it, because I think for a lot of physicians that have gone through it and found a way to, overcome it in a healthy way, they discover something else that they want to do. They discover some purpose that this lawsuit served, right? And if you could find that, or if you could just be at peace, it happened, here's my, like, I know I can do it. I know I can get through it. I know it's not going to get the best of me. That's all I would want. And certainly connecting with your colleagues would help on that tremendously.
Now, what kind of questions can physicians ask themselves to see whether they need further coaching like yourself, or whether they could handle it with the resources that they already have? What kind of questions should they be asking themselves in order to direct them to the next steps?
Yeah, I think they should ask themselves, what is going on through your mind as you're going through the lawsuit? Do you feel like the thoughts about the lawsuits are these constant circling, it's a circular pattern that you're experiencing? Are you waking up in the middle of the night thinking about the lawsuit? Do you have a lot of questions that you want a sounding board for, right? For example, if a physician works with me, if they raise there are certain questions that I can answer that have to do with the legal process in general, right? If there's a question that I cannot answer because it's a question for their attorney, I can help them articulate that question for their attorney without being involved. But I think you have to ask yourself, how is this process overtaking my thoughts? Am I still able to perform at my job to the best level that I can? Is it making my time with my family suffer? Am I not present? I have seen physicians that have gotten DUIs, that have gotten divorces, that have left the practice of medicine altogether, that have shifted their practices. I think as you're going through it, it may not be in the beginning, but you're really suffering through it. And I think that if you feel like you're suffering through it, reach out for a consult, see if it's for you. Sometimes having that consultation can help you get a feeling of whether or not, vibe for whether or not it's something that's going to help you. And certainly if you just want to, you need someone that's going to help you figure out the practicalities of here's how it's affecting me. What do I need to do to overcome it? What are some tools and strategies can I implement so that I am doing better, in this area of my life going forward as I, live my life through litigation.
We're talking to Christine Zharova. She's an attorney, and her KevinMD article is titled "Medical Malpractice is a Lot Like Running a Marathon." Christine, what are some of your take-home messages that you want to leave with the KevinMD audience?
Absolutely. So my take-home messages is that, just because you're sued, a lawsuit does not mean anything about you as a physician, right? Take an active role in your lawsuit too. Get into the driver's seat. So many physicians fade into the background and it doesn't serve them. It makes them feel less in control. It makes them have more questions. It causes more stress. And remember, you're not a stranger to overcoming challenges. You've had those times where you've had to take the boards, those times where you didn't sleep for 48 hours straight. You've had to overcome more challenges than most people. And so, with that in mind, you can overcome this. This is not something that should take away from your life in the way that it sometimes does. So those would be my takeaway tips.
Christine, thank you so much for sharing your time and insight. Thanks again for being on the show.
Thank you, Dr. Pro. Have a good day.